organizations, including serving as the Senior Director of Development for UCP of Central Florida. Her experience includes board governance, training and management of staff, board and volunteers, foundation and corporate support, special events, and legislative advocacy. Now today, if you have any questions, everyone is on mute mode, so if you do have a question, please type it in the question answer box, and at the end of the presentation, we will answer any and all questions. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Kate, and welcome, and thank you for coming.
Well, thank you for having me, and good morning, everyone. Today we're going to talk about successful grant proposal components. We only have a short period of time, so this is mainly an overview of this information. But we will be talking about why proposals typically are denied by funders, as well as the 5 fundraising relationships that are important to address in your proposal, an overview of what those components are, as well as what's important for your case of support, since that happens to be the most influential piece of your proposal in deciding whether or not you will receive funding. Some of those, what you must know, and a few tips of the trade as well. So we'll get started. So why are proposals typically denied? The number one reason is literally that the community need is not stated clearly and persuasively. And what we find funders saying about this is that really they're not sure what they're actually funding and how that's really going to impact the community if they were to fund the program or the project. The other is that the need that exists does not align with what the funder actually prioritizes as a need that it wishes to fund. So that's one of those number one things. You don't want to waste your time or theirs in putting all the effort into writing a proposal if it does not align with their mission or if their interests. And usually those are clearly stated on the RFP. So I know some of us like to say, well, we could stretch it in here, but in reality, what we're finding is that our funders will tell us that they will actually just reject instead of reading through a proposal that they don't think will actually fit what their priorities are. So with that said, to express that community need, the urgency of the need, and why you're the right group to address the problem with your programs and why they should fund and be a part of that with you are 5 vital relationships that need to be addressed in your proposal. The first is between the community need and your mission and your ability to meet that need. The second is between your executive director and your staff, especially the program or direct service staff that are going to be involved in the program. And when you're writing, you want to make sure that you really know all the details and everything you can about the program as well as your organization so that it's clear as to what it is that you're asking them to fund, how it's going to run, what your measure of success is going to be so that they can meet their why with your why. And I use that term why, meaning like the reason why you're doing something. Usually if you can align the belief as to we can change this issue in the community with a funder's reason for wanting to give, they are more likely to give to you. So the third is between what your organization and the prospective funder want to work on, which is that why I was just talking about. Fourth is the relationship between you and the prospective funder. So you want to kind of outline how you are going to have them involved, how you may bring them out to the site, perhaps to see the program in action while it's going on. And of course, if you can get them to your site before your application, that's always strongly recommended so that they've already got a tie or an interest in what you're doing and a relationship with you more individually. And then fifth is between the organization and who it serves in the community. All of these things you want to make sure are incorporated in your proposal. So the way I like to think about this when I write a proposal is I think about what I call the 12-12-12 rule. And that means that the person reviewing the proposal has just worked a 12-hour day. It's 12 o'clock in the morning, or midnight as otherwise known, and your document is 12th in their stack. So they've already read a few, their mind's a little tired, they're a little tired. So how should we write some of this? Well, first, don't use any jargon. And if you have to use jargon, make sure you define it so that they know how you are using that term, because a lot of times jargon is used in different ways by different people. Making sure we have white space and 1-inch margins, a 12-point font so it's easy to read, having it be left justified unless it's the budget section. That one we always want to be right justified so our zeros are lining up. Breaking up our page with subheadings, using short paragraphs with easy to read language, not using abbreviations that have not been defined. It is fine if you have a very long name for your organization or program to use that. Just make sure you define it for them. And of course, using correct spelling, punctuation, and math. And I will say, make sure you're double checking your math. Even if you're using Excel or another spreadsheet that automatically adds things up, sometimes those things don't work correctly. And if your math is off, that is what actually the second reason why, if your budget numbers are off, people will not want to fund. Believe it or not, they think that you're either confused about what you're asking them for, or you've confused them about what you're asking for, or they just don't trust your math at that point, which of course we don't want a lack of trust anywhere. And then, of course, the most obvious of these is perhaps following the guidelines that they've provided you exactly and in the order that they've given them to you, because that's actually what they want to see. And if you can't give them what they want up front, they're going to question your ability to report to them later as to the successes in the running of the program that they have funded. So that said, we're going to turn to grant proposal components. I'm going to just run through these very quickly, and then we will go into a little more depth on each. So first is the query letter, which I like to say is the letter that we're going to send up and say, we're hoping you'll invite us to apply for your proposals. This is where, we haven't been invited already. We're doing an introduction, making them aware of not only what our organization does, who we are and who we serve, but also what we are looking for funding for. In this letter, though, you won't be giving a specific amount. This is sort of like the teaser to get them to invite you to give them more. Second is the cover letter that you actually include with the grant request. Then you're going to have an executive summary or abstract, unless they've asked you not to give one. There are some times where they will ask for that not to be included. Typically, you do not want this longer than a page, which is simply a summary of your proposal. Second is your organization or program mission statement, the personnel and board experience and resumes, where we're showing them why they can trust your organization to fulfill what your promises are to them and trust you with their money. So along the more, as I say, the meat of the proposal, the other required components include the needs statement, which can also be referred to as your case for support or case statement, your goals and objectives, which are including the outcomes, not just your outputs, but what are we going to accomplish? What is the impact we are going to make in the community? The project description, which is describing our activities and methods for addressing the issue at hand. And then evaluation. What are we going to do to show you that we have reached a successful model here, both what we're doing is effective and that the impact is truly being made? The timeline, which can be slid into other parts of this as well, but this is when we're going to do what we're saying we're going to do and when, as well as how long it's going to take us to accomplish it. We're going to provide them with an organizational budget as well as a program-specific or project-specific budget, the sustainability plan, which is going to say, well, now that you have invested in us, that using our successes from this program, we will be able to sustain this program going forward because we will be able to do X, Y, and Z in terms of fundraising and receive funds elsewhere. Because many organizations do not like to fund multiple years for the same project unless it's at the very beginning of a project and it's outlined how the funds are going to be used in each year. A logic model, which is basically breaking it down into easy terms, the who, the what, the where, the why, the when, as well as showing that where we have collaborations in the community, we have letters of support or memorandums of understanding. So it's not just a sure, we'll be involved with you on that, but an actual concrete and understanding and working relationship. As well as, of course, attachments and enclosures. Typically, you're always going to include your 501c3 status determination letter, your board list and affiliations, as well as your budget, as we discussed, the 990, and any audited financials as well. So all of those, lots of pieces, but the one thing we have to keep in mind with each piece that we'll discuss is, does the funder know exactly what you want them to fund? Because when they do, we are exponentially more likely to receive the funds as long as it aligns with what they typically care to fund in the community than if we are more lacking in detail. So keeping that in mind, let's talk about each of those things we talked about a moment ago in a little more detail, and we'll start with the inquiry letter. So with the inquiry letter, we want to begin with what the funder values and needs. A lot of this with grant writing is very much like other forms of development. It is not about what our organization needs, but it is what the donor needs and wants to be involved with. So we're talking about what they value and what they need. And that's where we're making those connections between our funder and our cause, what we do that meets their values and relates to their interests. I know it sounds like I'm repeating myself a little bit there, but I can't stress that enough. And then we also want to make sure that we are giving them a summary of the need, but emphasizing that it's an important need. It's urgent to be solved. You're the people to solve it. This is the time to solve it. And give them just a little bit of data to show that need and how it applies to your local community to make that even more real. And then we, of course, want to explain why our solution is the best solution and why we are different from other organizations that maybe operate in the same field. And of course, as I said earlier, relate that back to why the funder is interested in this as their funding mission. So next is the cover letter. So this is where we've been invited to apply and we're submitting our proposal. In our cover letter, we're going to describe the request for the significance for the community and the funder's interest again. If they've given us support in the past, we want to thank them, of course, for that previous support. And also it's helpful to that in not only thanking them, but reminding them that they've already funded you. So they already hopefully have a good relationship. They know that you can fulfill the promises you make in your proposals. Keep it personal, keep it to the point, and keep it concise. But make sure you include the goals and outcomes, the number of clients that you're going to serve, the total amount of the request that's in line with your funding scope of the prospect. And what I mean by that is just keeping in mind that if this is the first time you've applied for a grant with a particular company and foundation, and perhaps the foundation gives out on average $5,000 to each of its recipients, you're not going to want to be asking them for $25,000 in the first ask. You want to go along the lines of what their average grant typically is. And then, of course, you want to explain to them the length of the program so they can see how their dollars are being used to make an impact. Also, your cover letter is a great place to include any important information that doesn't really fit the structure of the proposal and the categories that they've asked for information, but it's something that you think it kind of helps sell things a little further. This is the perfect place to put it, is in your cover letter. So turning to the executive summary, this is where we want to be brief and compelling, but when I say brief, we want to share those main ideas where we're making a strong case for the program, how it matches the funder's mission. It shows our credibility up front, the problem we're hoping to solve, as well as the proposed solution, the outcomes we expect, as well as the methods we're going to use, that total cost, how much we've already obtained, if any, and then how much we are requesting from them. Next is the mission statement, and of course, most nonprofits already have a very clear mission statement. This is where we can set that forward and then relate that, of course, to them. But one of the things I like to point out here is if you're having a hard time looking at your mission statement and how that fits with the funder's mission statement, this is where you should probably stop your proposal for that particular organization, because you're not going to meet up and you're going to waste both your time and the funder's time. So it may be something that you could revisit in the future if they have invited you to apply already. But if your funding opportunities don't match, it is okay to bless and release a funder as well. So next is the experience that your organization has. And really what we're answering here is the question, what is our capacity to be successful with your money in this program? What have we accomplished in the past? Where are we going in the future? This is where we'll talk about our organization. Is it fiscally sound? Is it well managed? Are we trustworthy and credible? And well respected. Now, of course, we're not going to say we're trustworthy and credible and respected. We're going to show this through examples of other relationships we've had, other grants that we've fulfilled, and the impacts that we have made with those in the community, as well as the organization as a whole in our community. And then our capability of providing a needed community service. So it makes it difficult if, say, our program is almost the size of our overall organizational budget to get funding all at once for that. So we're going to look at the pieces that we're asking for, making sure those are in relationship to what we're capable of providing, but also what this organization, the funder, is willing to provide as well. Case for support is actually your number one way to win your funding, and we're gonna talk about this a little bit here and then a little bit in more detail. But your case for support really needs to be motivational. It needs to be persuasive, and it needs to really answer several questions in a couple of different ways. So one is, why is our program needed? Why we can solve the problem and meet the need. How this is related not only to our mission, but also to the funder's mission. And then we need to be drafting this from the viewpoint of those that we serve, not from our organization. A lot of times you'll see proposals that say, we need the funding for this. And in reality, we want to be writing this from the standpoint of the community needs the funding for this program so that more teenage girls will remain in school without becoming pregnant. Depending on what your program is, of course, that's just a quick example. Again, no jargon. Make sure we're using credible, accurate information and data and giving a sense of urgency. This is a great place to use one story that can illustrate a both before and after effect of how someone can be individually impacted by the program. And this will then give both the sense of urgency plus personalization, and as we'll talk about in a minute, you're going to hit the different pieces of the brain, the heart, and the gut that then make the funder want to give you the grant. When you're writing your case for support, you also want to weave in here hard data, soft data, as well as local data, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes in a little more detail. But next is the goals. So what are our long-term impacts that we're looking to make with the program? What is it long-term that we are going to change in our community by offering the program that we're asking for funding for? Next are the objectives, and these are really more along the lines of short-term goals, and they should be written in terms of SMART goals, being specific, achievable, measurable, realistic, and timely. And really, this is where we're saying this is the specific effect that this group of people we are going to serve will see at the end of our program. So we're looking at the numbers, we're looking at the intensity, how long the activities will take, what activities will be taking place, who the people are that are being served, and then we're going to tell them what the specific results are going to be. So for each of these program overall goals, we're wanting 1 to 3 short-term objectives that will show how we can help measure our success. And so, for example, 75% of children participating in the program will increase their reading level by 1 grade level within 6 months of the program. This is an example. So we're going to say exactly what we're going to provide, and hopefully we're going to beat that 75%. And that's something else that's part of that realistic. In here, we don't want to overpromise. We want to make sure it's something that will be a market improvement, but is actually realizable. And so even better if we can beat that by showing 80%, because then the funder's even happier. So project description. Now that we said what the goals are going to be, we're going to talk about how we're going to do that and what we're going to do. So what we're going to do are actual activities, but our methods are how we're going to do it. And we're going to want to include with that data that will show why our methods are the best methods for solving this, whether that's pointing to a program in a different county, and here we're asking for funding to expand our program into a new county or a different location, or whether it's this is a brand new program, but you know what, there's an organization in another state or another place that follows these same methods, and they have had great success, and this is their success that shows that our methods are valid. So we're talking about not only the activities we're going to carry out, but your start and end times, your population served, who is responsible for for this program and its implementation, their credentials that make them the best person for that. Like I said, the rationale for using the method, and then any other resources or facilities or equipment that are available to us that we are not asking for funding for. We want them to see the whole gamut. So I could describe to you as a funder what the program is that I am going to fund. And then, of course, the evaluation is how we're going to prove success has occurred. You will show them through your assessment methods what those assessment methods are, when they're going to be used, how that is going to measure so we can see that 75% of those children improve their reading, and then how we're going to demonstrate that success out into the community as well as to the funder also. The timeline, and this is something that could easily fit into your project description. If you can make it visual, I recommend it. Of course, you would not want your font to be this small, especially if they're reading it at 12 a.m. But you do want at least something to show, whether it's in a visual format or using an Excel spreadsheet, what the timeline is for your activities when even researching certain things, if it's a brand new program, would take place, so that they see the flow of how the program will work in a time sense. On the budget side, we're going to show them two types of budgets. We typically are going to show them the organizational budget, which shows all the revenues and expenses for the organization as a whole, but then we're going to provide them as well with a specific program or project budget, which is going to explain your revenues and expenses related to running the program itself, as well as what part of that belongs to the funder you're asking for and others. So I recommend doing that where you have your line items set out, you have the total amount, then you have the amount you're requesting from the funder broken down into where you're going to be using the money that they give you, and then showing them where other funding is coming from. If anything might look a little off or questionable, or maybe you feel like you need an explanation, this is where you want to do it. You can either footnote or make another section that right below that budget that addresses those issues directly so that it's very clear how that program funding is being used. The sustainability plan, this is where we're talking about, okay, with your funds, this will now allow us to raise additional funding to run this program in the future because of X, Y, and Z, whether it is because others will see that you have given your support and the successes that we achieve through the program now allow us to have valid success information and impact information to go to others in the community, or showing that we can replicate this and expand the program to our general donors and get them more involved in this as well. And then also the actual ways you're going to raise those funds and the efforts you're going to put forth with respect to that after the initial grant funding or even towards the tail end of it. Collaboration and partnerships, I know I mentioned this earlier briefly. This is really where we're looking at expanding our impact in the community by working with others either in the same field or who have access to the people that we want to serve. And this is where we're going to talk about a relationship, how that relationship is going to work. Typically, it'll be part of your project description. You'll mention who the relationship is with, and then later in your appendix, you will have a letter of understanding or a memo of understanding or a letter of support, depending on what you want to call it, to actually verify that you have a formalized relationship and that it is actually functional. And it's not just a verbal, oh yeah, we'll help you with that. That sounds good. So that way you have access to the people you need to serve. You have people who can help in running the program, and you're creating a bigger consensus and net of that impact you can make in our community. Last of these are the appendix and attachments. I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are literally the list of what you typically see, depending on the type of proposal, of course, as well as what can be expected or requested of you by a funder. Your normal ones, of course, are your 501c3 letter of determination, the list of your board members and affiliations, as well as resumes for key staff members, your organizational budget and project budget, as well as those audited financials and your 990. The rest of these will depend on what you need to explain or what is requested of you. So turning back to case for support, because I said that was the number one way to really get across your point to the funder as to why this is important, why they need to fund it now, why it's them, and why it's you that they need to be in relationship with. So here we're wanting to both persuade and inspire, and we're going to do this by telling them what is the nature of the problem we're trying to solve. So for example, if you happen to want to run a Memorial Day program for veterans who are disabled or elderly and they can't be outside in the heat. Most of those programs happen to be outside in a park, so maybe there's uneven terrain or people are afraid to go because of the heat, being outside, not having even ground, just the things that would distract them normally. You would bring that up here. You would explain to them why it's important to veterans to be able to attend a Memorial Day program and why, especially for our elderly veterans and our disabled veterans, why that might be important to provide to the community and why it's needed now. You're going to use data. So how do we know this problem exists? Well, you know what, in working with people at the VA, we took a survey of the VA members that we were talking to, and 75 to 80% of them said that if there was an indoor Memorial Day service, they would be there. And you know what, they're not attending Memorial Day services right now because they can't, because of their disability or because it's so hot they just can't handle the Florida heat in May. So then we're going to take that information. We're telling them what our specific population we're going to reach. So I'm going to change our example here and say we're working with avoiding teenage pregnancy among at-risk populations. We're going to tell them that's who we're serving. This is the solution that we propose, how we know that this will succeed, why this is the best solution. And we do that through, again, data. And then we want to choose one compelling before and after story to humanize our data and to make the funder realize how they can truly impact one. There's a saying that says, I can't help the world, but I can help that person over there. And that's really how people do feel, even on the funding side, because they're looking at the problems in our community or the needs in our community, and the needs are very great, and maybe the population is great as well. But if we can humanize it to, this person went through our program, and this is what they were going through before entering the program. After being in our program and learning this, that, and the other, this happened for them and thus improved their life. That really shows them what the client's need is, again, from that client perspective as well as the funder's perspective, in an easy and compelling way, that there is a need that this funder needs to help solve by providing you the funding because you're the expert to then solve that problem. And of course, we want to make that not only related to our mission, but to the funders as well. So I talked about explaining those things through data. And the different types of data we want to use, I like to say, are hard, soft, and local. So those are three different types of data. The hard data is quantitative. So we're talking about things like statistics, surveys, pre and post testing, expert testimony, studies, things along those lines. And then our soft data, on the other hand, is maybe that story we tell or quotes from people who have gone through the program, letters from people that have seen a difference in the people we've been helping, photos even of the activities and people participating, or even a client speaking in person should you get an interview with the funder. And then, of course, not just making that data be global in the sense of the state of Florida or the United States or even just our county, but also local. How is that specifically affecting, say, Orange County students? How is that specifically affecting the people that are right here that we are going to serve? Because that data is used by the funder to ask, and some of these, I just put them in a very straightforward manner, are, okay, you've given me all this, but so what? What does it matter? Who really cares about this? Why are you the organization that should answer this? Why now? And why me as funding it? So those are really the strong uses for your hard data. And I like to say you want to sprinkle them like spices throughout that case for support and the narrative story. So you could be saying, this person has experienced this, but they're not alone. X% of people in Orange County, blah, blah, blah. So you're making it tie together. So you're telling the person's story, but also telling the story of the need in your community, why now, and why you, and why the funder. So I always say that you should not only write this, but then share your case for support with others and ask them, does it take their breath away with the data and the story? Because our story is going to speak to the heart, and then the data is going to speak to our brain, and hopefully that together are going to give us the gut instinct that we need to do something now. And if we can touch the heart, brain, and gut, we have a successful case for support. So some of those tips that I mentioned, they may seem obvious, but believe it or not, when we get into grant writing, and I'm guilty of this as well, I've had to go back through some of my own grants and, make things slightly work better. But these are the things that we need to be reminded of. First of these is following the guidelines. Whatever guidelines they give you, if they want, your certain font and a certain font size, give them that font and font size they want. If they want it in a certain order, give it to them in that certain order, even if that's not how you like to write it. That's what they want, give them what they want. Be brief, but not too brief. I always say you want to be brief enough that you get the point across without them feeling like they're reading a novel. But at the same time, you don't want to be so brief that they're not really sure what you're asking them for or why you're asking. You want to organize your thoughts, use plain English, and be realistic in making your promises. You never want to overpromise, because if you can't meet your promises to your funder, they're not likely to fund you again if you can't meet your initial promises. Because this is a relationship, even though it feels like we're giving them a proposal and they're either going to accept or deny, long term it really is a relationship with the funder, because we don't only want them to fund us now, but maybe also for other things in the future. So we want to be realistic. We want to hit on our strengths in particular, be clear about what we're asking for in the amount of money, both in our conclusion as well as in our executive summary and cover letter. We want to make sure we're crafting it again to the specific donor interests, because we want them to connect. We want them to have their reason for wanting to fund things in the community to match with our reason of performing these services to meet the needs of our community. Proofread carefully. Your spelling, your grammar, and your math do count, especially the math. As I mentioned before, that's one of the number one things outside of the case for support that funders tell us, that that if the math doesn't add up or doesn't make sense, they're not going to fund. And then try and read your proposal through the eyes of a donor. One of the ways I like to do this is first using the proofreading. I'll actually read my paragraphs backwards to just see if I can find the errors that a donor might see, because if I've written this 15 times and I've read it 15 times and I've edited it a million more times, I'm going to miss a couple things, because in my head it looks the way I want it, right? But if I can go backwards through it and it still makes sense, as well as finding any errors, I think you're more likely to have your donor connect with it. The other thing is to just take yourself out of the role as service provider and say, would I fund this if somebody brought this to me? And that can be a really strong sense of what needs to change or be rearranged or reorganized, of course, still following those guidelines that they want you to follow. So I found this. There's some really fun memes out there about grant funding, and this one cracked me up. But I think if you follow our tips and the setting up your proposal in this way, we can be excited, like like in the Hunger Games, right? About let the ranking and reviewing begin, and may the data ever be in our favor. So we'll see now what questions you all have. If you can help me get to that screen, that would be great. Oh. Do we have any questions? Please feel free to submit some. I think someone's hand is raised.
Yeah. But
okay. So maybe if you click on the question.
yeah, well that was
Oh, here, I have a question.
okay, type it out.
Ivan, if you could tell us what your question is by typing it into the box. All right, thank you. I am wondering how long on average, could you click the question? Okay.
On average.
Oh, it's coming in.
To take to complete the process.
I'm not, so the question is,
From beginning to end.
how long it will take you to complete the process from beginning to end. I'm wondering if you are asking how long to complete the writing process. What I typically will tell you is that you should, if it's especially the first time you're writing a proposal, if you think it's going to take you 2 days, plan on 4. But I like to give myself a week to do the actual writing. But before that, I will take different time frames to collect all of the information I need first from my organization, from the people who know about the project, who are going to implement the project and run the project. So that, I would say, I like to give myself at least a couple hours for me writing, and then at least 2 days of waiting to get the information. Sometimes you're going to have to follow up with phone calls and maybe even walk down to where they are to talk to them directly about this, so that they're busy in their normal day of doing their work, and this will give you some time there to get the information you need. And then doing any research you need can take also 2 to 3 days. So I would give yourself at least 2 full weeks for the process from start to finish of writing. But then you have to remember that once you submit your proposal, then you should have a time frame that's been given to you by the particular funder you've submitted to. That will give you a better idea from when you submit to what the process will be for them to actually award. Some organizations that can be as quick as a couple weeks. I've heard of some that turn around same day, but many of them are going to take probably a month to 2 months at least to get back to you. And then some will also include interviews where they want to pull you in for an interview before deciding. And so depending on the process there, could take you, so from start of writing to finish of actually getting the award, it could be 6 months, 6 to 8 months at the longest, but it can also be shorter. It just depends on how big the foundation is, what their process is, how often they meet to make decisions. But usually you can ask that up front to know, just get an idea of who or how long that process will take from whoever the contact is at the foundation. So hopefully that answers your question.
Is there any other questions? Okay, well, thank you, Kate. That was amazing. I've learned a lot. If later on, if anybody has a question, they can email me at jennifer.lister@npis.com, and I'll reach out to Kate and make sure you get an answer. But it looks, right now, everybody's got the information they need, so thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. I can end it.